After New Hampshire, a Trump-Biden rematch is looking more and more likely, and Wall Street and corporate America is now grappling with what to do if or when the former president officially becomes the Republican nominee, with a chance to retake the White House. With us for more, Brian Schwartz, political finance reporter with CNBC, and former Wall Street banker turned journalist Bill Cohan. He is a founding partner at Puck News. If you haven't read his stuff, you must. It's fantastic. All right. Grappling or backing, right? There is a little bit of a Nikki Haley romance going on, but that's a sideshow. Big picture. Even with all the headaches, the chaos of Donald Trump, post Davos, it sounds like the business community is more and more open to the idea of Donald Trump in the White House again. Bill, does that tell you that at the end of the day, it's all just about corporate tax cuts and deregulation for them?
It's all about adjacency to power, genuflecting to power, not wanting to be out of the loop when you can see where power is heading, right? I think, clearly the message out of Davos, I wasn't there, but from listening to it, was that, Trump he's going to win. He's done. He's got the nomination. He's going to be president of the United States. So what a surprise to see Jamie Dimon, cozying right up to Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, soon there during Davos, during an interview on CNBC. It was one of the most disappointing things that I've seen so far this year.
But is the business community cozying up to Donald Trump, or have they learned to survive and play ball, right? There's no CEO out there that wants to be in the situation Anheuser-Busch/Bud Light was in last year. Nobody wants to be in Bob Iger and Disney's position. They know, look at Donald Trump's tweet tonight. He's going to go after Nikki Haley donors. They know they have to, at the very least, be sort of on his good side or not his target.
They clearly believe they have to play a very careful dance with Donald Trump. Whether people agree with that, ethically or morally is another story. The fact is, that you saw what he said tonight. He brought up this idea of kind of revenge on Nikki Haley's donors. There's some of them who have ties directly to Donald Trump. One of them, named Henry Kravis, is co-hosting an event in New York in a matter of days, and he was a donor to Donald Trump's first inaugural campaign. At least that's what I'm seeing when I'm reading up through the data. So this is the situation right now for these folks. They're trying to kind of play this balancing act as Donald Trump surges what it appears to be on the path to the nomination. And, it is interesting why I say that when you think about there was so much discussion last year through things I've heard, things I've seen, the public statements about Wall Street executives, some of them trying to find a way to stop Donald Trump to becoming the GOP nominee. Just this kind of larger effort of talk of, we're going to go back this candidate, we're going to go oppose Donald Trump. And here we are today. Many of those same people haven't put a dime.
Can I just tell you why? And I'm going to speak for Bill and I both. Because a lot of these Wall Street guys and their big plans to stop Donald Trump, they know a hell of a lot about markets and how to make money.
You're right.
Very few of them know anything when it comes to politics. Just look at how much they donate to No Labels, which is on a fast track to nowhere. Bill, let's talk about Joe Biden, though, because Joe Biden is not Bernie Sanders. Joe Biden is not anti-business. Look at his policies. Look at the recession that we averted, and it wasn't Joe Biden that averted it, but that's a huge positive. Businesses are growing. The economy is growing. Consumer confidence is up. Why does it seem that the business community doesn't see that? Is that he doesn't cozy up to them? Is that it?
Look, we all know that the economy is doing much better than anybody thought. We are on our way to the so-called soft landing. We are avoiding a recession. Stock market's at an all-time high. Unemployment continues to be at an all-time low. I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why Joe Biden does not get credit for that. Not even from sophisticated people.
This is my point. Maybe your average person on the street who doesn't necessarily know the ins and outs, but the business community certainly does.
Absolutely should. And I think it's because they can see where the gravitational pull of power is coming. They can see that Trump is on the ascendancy to coming back again. As painful as that is, they can feel it in their bones, and they want to make sure they're not excluded from it. They want to make sure they can still cozy up to him. They want to make sure that their company, J.P. Morgan Chase or whatever it is
any
company is not, a victim of a Donald Trump rant that might hurt their business.
And Joe Biden is watching all of this. Do you think there is a lane that he could potentially start to spend more time with the business community? I actually spoke to a CEO this week, and I said, what are you talking about? Joe Biden doesn't have anti-business policies. And he said to me, look at his schedule. If you want to know someone's priorities, look at who he meets with. And Joe Biden doesn't spend a lot of time with Fortune 500 CEOs. There isn't a person in this administration in that Valerie Jarrett position kind of interfacing with the business community.
I've heard the same type of complaints. I don't know if they're complaints or really just conversations I've had.
Observations, not really.
Yeah. So, but the point of that is, I think, though, when you see the movement that Trump's been having in this primary, there are going to be people who are on the sidelines right now, people who are to try to figure out who they should support and come to help Joe Biden. I've been talking to various people who, frankly, they're Democrats, but they've been critical of Joe Biden. Some of the same, points we're making here, even though they're not, sound. They were talking about the economy and being critical of the economy, and the economy is doing okay. And so some of these folks are now saying, well, you know what? Trump's on the rise. We have to now get in Joe Biden's corner, and let's figure this out.
What difference does it make if he meets with corporate leaders or not? He's not running them down. He's not being negative about them. They have record profits. Their stock is at an all-time high. The unemployment rate is low. The economy is...
Bill, I'm not suggesting he needs to kiss anybody's ring. But he is running for president, and he does
want... He should be a better communicator about his accomplishments. But this is my point. He is
running for president. He has a challenge that his accomplishments aren't getting through to people.
Well,
Could that be an avenue he goes on? I'm not saying he should kiss anyone's ring. He did get a huge endorsement today.
Huge.
A huge endorsement from the Auto Workers Union.
Right.
However, in 2016... Hillary Clinton had huge union endorsements, but what Donald Trump was able to do was peel off the rank and file, and union members around the country voted for him. What's Joe Biden's plan here? Because he can't let that happen.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden is much more of, he's from Scranton. He is a union man through and through. He went out to the United Auto Workers.
Walked the picket line.
So I don't think Joe Biden's going to let that happen. But, I don't understand it, Stephanie. I've never understood it now for 8 years, why people who are in unions, rank and file, the working class of America, supports Donald Trump. He doesn't care one whit about them. And yet, a lot of them support him, and I don't understand it.
He might not care, but he speaks to them.
Oh, in what kind of language? I don't get it.
Listen, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I've interviewed a ton of people right outside Pittsburgh. We were just talking to people in New Hampshire, and many people feel that for years and years and years, no one talked to them and they were ignored. Now, Donald Trump may have handed them a whole lot of lies, but he showed up at their door, he threw a giant party, and they spoke to him. In 2016, they believed it. The question now is...
Why do they still believe it?
The question is now, he didn't do anything for you for 4 years.
This is a problem
Trump didn't do anything
Biden.
for you in 4 years. Why do you think he will now?
And that's the messaging ploy the president's going to have to figure out. And I think he's going to start ramping that up now. I think you touched on this in the last segment, that how they're starting to evolve and really go into the general election campaign mode. That is, I think, something they are going to be focusing on, that compare and contrast much more heavily.
Well, here's the good news for President Biden. Messaging is the easier part. He already got the policy part. Do you remember how many infrastructure weeks Donald Trump had? I think it was 10. You know what Joe Biden had? The biggest infrastructure law signed, passed in modern history. Just got to figure out the messaging.